Let me introduce myself. My name is John McDonnell. I'm Member of Parliament for Hayes and Harlington. Let me introduce the other people on the platform. I'm Machon, who's from the Campaign to Make War History, and Chris Coverdale, who will be making a presentation on a report back on where we're at in the long campaign to expose the criminality of what happened over Iraq. Just the background for me is that 3 years ago I hosted a meeting in Parliament with Chris and a range of others, Mike Mansfield, a range of other lawyers as well, who outlined their concerns about the legality of the decision made by the government to undertake the war in Iraq, and set out then the basis upon which they considered the decision on the war was illegal. Now since then, and Chris will explain, people have done a lot of detailed work on the legal position, research in detail, analysing points of law, and came to the conclusion that indeed the decision to invade Iraq was illegal, and since then have been seeking to have that properly investigated by the legal authorities. And what Chris will be reporting today is that, having attempted that over a period of time, we're now in a situation where the police are actually investigating the issue around the illegality of the invasion of Iraq. So that's a significant breakthrough. So today's press conference is to take people through the process of what's happened up until now and really what the consequences are as a result of this investigation.
My name is Chris Coverdale. I've been investigating the breaches of the law, war law, for more than 5 years, and I first attempted to get the war stopped on the grounds that it was illegal a month before it started in 2003. And since then we've had about 150 attempts to get the police to investigate what are quite obviously crimes. So today, just before I go into the details today, I would like to issue a health warning, or some sort of warning anyway. It is very important to realise that when talking about the law, that we are absolutely clear of what the law says. It's not possible for journalists to report accurately on war crimes, for MPs and peers to hold ministers to account for war crimes, for the police and Crown Prosecution Service to prosecute war crimes without understanding the laws of war. If you don't know the law, you cannot know when it has been breached. So, to ensure that everyone gets the right picture, what I've done is prepare a 4-page briefing. You've probably got a blue document there that goes into detail on the laws of war. It's very important that before you report anything on here, journalists have a real understanding of the laws. And remember, not only does nobody in this room or no one in this country have a clear understanding of the laws of war, but none of the public have an understanding. So if you are going to communicate with them effectively, please put it into context of the laws that have been passed internationally over the last 80 years. I want to do 3 things. 1, I want to explain the war laws that have been violated. 2, to explain the war crimes that the Metropolitan Police are investigating. And then 3, outline where we go from here. At the end of that, we'll have a questions and answers session. So first of all, I start with a short reprise of what's gone on over the last 6 years, the key facts relevant. In March 2002, Blair agreed with Bush in Washington to wage war with Iraq. On March the 7th, 2003, Lord Goldsmith, our Attorney General, sent his legal advice to Blair. After that, Blair and Goldsmith informed Parliament and the armed forces that war with Iraq would be legal and was authorised by UN Security Council resolutions 678, 687 and 1441. This was the lie, the key lie. That is, nothing about that statement is true. March the 18th, Parliament voted. They had a long 6-hour debate and they voted for the war, the armed invasion and occupation of Iraq. Luckily, there were 149 members, including John and a number of others, who voted against it. knowing that it was illegal and it was the wrong thing to do. Anyway, the outcome of it was that on March the 20th, the war started, and you'll remember the shock and awe bombardment of Baghdad, which was heavily publicised around the world on the television. Coalition land, sea and air forces used cruise missiles, rockets, cluster bombs and depleted uranium munitions to make at least 40,000 attacks on targets in villages, towns and cities in Iraq. Between March, when the war started, and December 2007, we caused the deaths of at least 100,000 and possibly 1 million innocent Iraqis. And it is that act that we want to look at the legality of today. We've killed at least 30,000 and possibly 300,000 children. We need to make the point that not one of these people had done anything to attack or harm Britain. None of them had been allowed to plead for their lives in court, and none of them had been shown any mercy before they were massacred. And 150 British servicemen and women have also been killed, and certainly over 2,000 injured. Now, Tony Blair and the British government have repeatedly claimed that the invasion and occupation is legal, and Blair has said over and over again it was the right thing to do. The questions we ask is, since when has it been right to kill children? What law gives Tony Blair and George Bush the right to massacre tens of thousands of innocent people and destroy their country? When ever can a war be legal? Just before we start, can I just check in the room, how many of you have heard of the International Treaty for the Renunciation of War? About half. How many know what it says? That's interesting. 1, 2. How many of you have heard of the UN Charter? That's nearly the whole room. How many of you know what it says and what it prohibits? 1 or 2. How many of you have heard of the Nuremberg Principles? That's good. How many have heard of the International Criminal Court Act? About half of the room. How many know what crimes it includes? Good. It's mainly the activists, I notice. Now, the point about this is that if you ask those questions of the normal general public, you'll get very, very few positive answers. And yet these are the world's most important laws. And if we are going to run this world on the basis of the rule of law, then we must know the law. Right, let's turn to what's happening with the Metropolitan Police. As I said, we've reported these crimes on more than 150 occasions. And on every occasion, the police in 44 different jurisdictions in this country have turned down and have failed to follow up the reports until just before Christmas. Now, what happened is that they are now investigating 14 different crimes. We went in there, and 6.5 hours we handed over lots of evidence and information about these 14 crimes. They fall into 4 main areas. The crimes that have been committed are genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and conduct ancillary to those 3 crimes. And they are crimes under sections 51 and 52 of the International Criminal Court Act 2001, which is the British legislation that applies to every British resident. We also reported a crime against peace and complicity in a crime against peace under Articles 6 and 7 of the Nuremberg Principles.